Good evening, everyone. My name is Ware Harmon, and I'm the Executive Director of Town Hall Seattle. On behalf of the rest of our team here at Town Hall and our friends at Third Place Books, it's a pleasure to welcome you to tonight's virtual presentation of Tracy Swinton Bailey. As we get underway, I want to acknowledge that our institution stands on the unceded traditional territory of the Coast Salish people, particularly the Duwamish. We thank them for our continuing use of the natural resources of their ancestral homeland. We're so glad you're back with us as we commence another season at Town Hall. It's our 22nd. This will be a year unlike any other, I assure you, featuring in-person events, virtual events, and what we're calling hybrid events, which you can probably figure out what that means. We're also continuing our scaled up podcast In the Moment, featuring exclusive interviews of authors, artists, and newsmakers by Ginny Palmer, Steve Scher, and other local correspondents. And meanwhile, you'll find many of our past talks available in video or podcast form in our digital media library. There's lots of ways to engage with Town Hall this season. After tonight's 30-minute event, we'll have a Q&A to integrate our in-person and virtual audience experiences. We've changed the Q&A platform for our programs. To submit your question, please enter meet.ps/Bailey or scan the QR code that's on the screen right now with your smartphone. We'll drop this link in the chat a little later and remind folks again in the audience when we get to Q&A how you can do it. We can't guarantee we'll get to every question, but we'll try to get to as many as possible. And toward that end, you can help out by keeping your question concise. For those who'd like to view the program with closed captions, click the CC button in the bottom right corner of the video player. Town Hall's adding new events every day. Upcoming events include a look at quarantines, past and very present, with authors Nicola Twilley and Jeff Maynaw, a discussion of segregation in real estate with Gene Slater and Jay Rich, Farah Jasmine Griffin's personal reflection on Black literature, and 3 events celebrating extraordinary local voices, an evening of collected essays by Seattle Times and South Seattle Emerald journalist Marcus Harrison Green, original music inspired by Susanna Ryan's Seattle Walk Report from Town Hall favorites, the Bushwick Book Club, and a celebration of 30 years of Savage love with the irrepressible Mr. Dan Savage himself. Those last 2 events will feature live audiences in the building, and you won't want to miss them. You want to be a part of that. So check out our website or subscribe to our new e-newsletter to get the latest updates. Town Hall's programs are made possible through your support and the support of our sponsors. Civics programs are supported by the Real Networks Foundation, the True Brown Foundation, the Nesholm Family Foundation, the Caffin Foundation, and the Wyncote Foundation Northwest. But at heart, Town Hall is a member-supported organization, and I want to thank all of our members watching tonight. If you share Town Hall's vision of a healthy community strengthened by ideas and creative expression, we hope you'll consider supporting us tonight with a donation or by becoming a member yourself. Last, you will definitely want to learn more about tonight's topic, and the best way I can think of is to purchase a copy of Tracy Swinton Bailey's book, Forever Free. We've made this very easy for you indeed. Just use the link in the chat below to pick up your copy through Third Place Books. And when you do that, you'll serve the dual goal of supporting a local independent bookstore at a time when they could certainly use the love, and having your copy of Forever Free. That's the other part of the goal, I should have made very clear. All right, and with that, Tracy Swinton Bailey earned her PhD in education with a specialization in language and literacy at the University of South Carolina in 2013. She began her career as a high school English teacher and went on to found Freedom Readers, an after-school and summer literacy program that was designed and implemented to support families in low-income areas and assist children in achieving their academic goals in reading. Her new book, Forever Free, A True Story of Hope in the Fight for Child Literacy, is the subject of this evening's presentation. Please join me in welcoming Tracy Swinton Bailey.
Thank you so much, Ware. It is such a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to this time together for quite some time. This is my book, Forever Free, and it is a memoir and a call to action. And so I'm going to read to you this evening 2 passages from the book. The first passage that I want to share is more on the memoir side, and the second passage that I'll share will be more of the call to action. I'll start with a passage that's in chapter 1 of Forever Free. I grew up in North Santee, a small community in South Carolina that sits next to the Santee River and straddles Georgetown and Charleston counties. Our churches rested at the center of the community, with Singleton AME on Highway 17 and Mount Zion AME on Powell Road. By the time I was born, 4 generations of my family had been a part of Mount Zion. The preachers were like family, and just about every adult I knew consistently volunteered there to keep it running smoothly. They were stewards and trustees and secretaries and sextons and class leaders. Every person in that church knew my family. We were close-knit. When I was a child, we were taught that we were the legacy of Richard Allen, who started the African Methodist Episcopal Church in 1816 so that Blacks could worship without the threat of racial discrimination and oppression, in a place where people who looked like us could begin to understand our intrinsic worth and God-given rights. We celebrated the ideals of our founder, who hid escaped slaves in the basement of his church and established Sabbath schools to teach literacy and elevate the status of the Black community nationwide. It is the Black church, with its deep roots in dignity, resistance, uplift, and solidarity, that would give rise to the likes of Frederick Douglass and Martin Luther King, that has shaped me. This is where my parents walked out an intrinsic compulsion to care for their community, and why they thought it was so important for me to do the same. It is within these sacred walls that I first encountered the idea of charity, depicted in scripture as the highest form of love, the unselfish love of one's fellow man, the foundation and root of all other virtues. My ability to articulate my understanding of charity came into focus by degrees rather than in a blinding flash of revelation. This ideology began to crystallize for me when I was a 37-year-old graduate student driving back and forth from my home in Myrtle Beach to the campus of the University of South Carolina in Columbia. I listened to books on the drive to keep my mind occupied, and one sparked a deep internal debate. Tracy Kidder's Mountains Beyond Mountains, the quest of Dr. Paul Farmer, a man who could cure the world, prompted questions with which I would grapple for years. What is the true meaning of charity? Is charity always beneficial, or can the purity of charity be co-opted by those who would do harm to the poor? I've come to understand that there is a strong distinction between what we have referred to as charity in America and what I've come to call radical care. Brian Stevenson, a social justice activist and founder of the Equal Justice Initiative, puts it this way: We are all broken by something. We have all hurt someone and have been hurt. We all share the condition of brokenness, even if our brokenness is not equivalent. Radical care can manifest when our desire to extend charity rises out of our unique brokenness instead of our guilt or our superiority. When we embrace radical care, we increase our capacity for compassion and our inner strength shines through. In addition to getting a firm grasp on concepts like charity, my reading journey has led to a struggle to understand issues of race, class, gender, and privilege. When encountering biblical passages that direct believers to be kind to the poor and needy, I have wondered who exactly well-intentioned Americans propose to help when they read about these poor. It's more than just theory to me, it's personal. In the minds of some, my identity as a Black woman who grew up in the rural South automatically makes me a part of the group that needs to be helped. After all, when we think of riding in on a white horse and playing the role of savior, we don't see the individual faces or hear the specific names or consider the unique stories of those we're helping. Often our imaginations are guided by what the Nigerian writer Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie has termed the single story, a prevailing narrative about a group or culture or country that ignores the complexity of the individual. My very existence and the work to which I have been dedicated obfuscate the image of what helpers should look like. My father walked away from formal schooling at the end of the 8th grade because there was no bus to take Black children into town to attend school. And my mother took a break from school after giving birth for the first time at age 14. I am the youngest of 7 siblings who grew up on dirt roads and have received some financial assistance from the government, even though both my parents worked. I qualified for free lunch from kindergarten through 12th grade. I am the poor that many privileged people call to mind when they try to imagine ways that they can atone for the sins of their slaveholding ancestors. I'm the product of women who scrubbed toilets and rocked white women's babies and had to catch rides on rickety buses to make less than 2 hours a week. By all accounts, I should be the one needing the help. That's a passage from chapter 1 of the book that gives you a little bit of biographical background on who I am. And now I want to share with you from a chapter later in the book that talks more about the Freedom Readers program that I started in 2010. This is a section that I think is very user-friendly and very easily applicable. It says, for the caregivers reading this, who are searching for concrete things that they can do to help their children read better at home, here are 5 ideas, all based on best practices as defined by educational research and what we've observed at our weekly meetings. First, receive. The first meetings of our Freedom Reader sessions are set aside for getting to know more about the learners with whom we are working. We encourage all caregivers to deliberately set aside time to find out more about the child's reading interests. Our interest inventory is reproduced in Appendix A, and it's also available at the Freedom Readers website. That's freedomreaders.org. You can use these questions to help children begin to articulate their preferences and interests. Combine this knowledge with what you have noticed or observed about the child and construct a personalized reading profile. The key is to say as little as possible and simply receive the information that many young children are more than willing to share. A few thoughtfully timed questions for clarification can go a long way, but for the most part, let the child lead. The second R is research. Find books that align with the reader's interests. If the child loves animals, scour the library for books about the specific animals that they have mentioned. You don't have to spend a fortune on these books. Drop by the local library and ask the librarian to help you check out the right book. Some of those books will spark the interest of the reader, and some will fall flat. Explore a few different interests at one time and notice which ones elicit the most intense reaction. Try fiction, nonfiction, comic books, picture books, poetry, and more. The key is to expose the reader to as much as possible while working within their zone of interest. Also, allow the young reader to choose what they want to read in order to keep them engaged. The third R is record. Keep a list on the refrigerator of the books you and your child read together. Make a note of authors that seem to be the child's favorites and provide more of those books. If a child gravitates toward one series, try to find others like that one. If the books you suggest do not get a great response, browse through websites and let your child make suggestions. If her suggestions end up getting read most often, make a note of that as well. Check the appendix for a sample reading record list, and that list is also available on our website at freedomreaders.org. The fourth R is read aloud. Even older children need to hear stories read by good readers. If you don't feel comfortable doing the reading, in the appendix, there is a list of websites you can check that will do the reading for you. Allow children to read out loud to you so that you can get a sense of their ability to decode words. And finally, the last R is respond. Reading is a social act. Share with the young reader connections that the stories bring to mind. Help relate what you are reading to the real world and to the reader's experience. Praise young readers who use the skills they are learning in school to figure out the pronunciation of new words instead of telling them the words right away. Always point out what the reader is doing well and explain that the brain is like a muscle. It grows stronger as we exercise it. We found these basic principles lead to success with many of our scholars. As we transition back to a time when we can gather safely, we'll continue to incorporate these principles into our online offerings. As many caregivers find ways to support their child's reading development, these strategies will take on new meaning. Don't forget that consistency is important and routines matter. So that's just a little bit about how we interact with young people during the Freedom Readers program. Very quickly, the program itself, as I said earlier, was started in 2010. And we meet weekly with young people. We call them scholars. The big portion of the children that meet with us right now are in kindergarten through 5th grade. And each one of those children is assigned a tutor to work with them on a weekly basis. We will invite about 20 young people to get involved, and then we'll find 20 people in our community. They could be doctors or lawyers or retired teachers or librarians or just parents themselves who want to be a part of this setting. Before the pandemic hit, we were operating 22 of these sites in 3 counties in South Carolina. Each one of our sessions, which might last from 8 to 10 weeks, each one of our sessions is built around a theme. And these themes might range anywhere from the presidents to the Olympics. Over the summer, our theme was, how does your garden grow? And the young people had an opportunity to meet at a garden outside and read books about gardens and even work in the garden. We start each one of these sessions with a theme song because I love giving children the opportunity to connect what they are seeing with what they're hearing. When I was growing up in church, I would read lots of words in our hymnal that were being sung by the choir. And that's how I got to learn a lot of words. After we go through our whole group time and we have a snack, then we set aside 45 minutes for scholars and tutors to read together. A tutor might read to a scholar something that they're not ready to read on their own, and a scholar might read to a tutor something that they've practiced reading in school. The last thing we do in our meetings is we set aside about 15 minutes for these young scholars to make a speech. We give them an outline, and we talk to them about things like making eye contact and using voice projection and speaking with enthusiasm. This is the place where we see a lot of the young people that work with us grow. Some in the beginning are so shy that they don't really want to face the audience as they're talking. They might even turn their back to the audience and speak to an empty wall. But by the end of that 8 to 10 week session, we have to make a list of who can go first, because just about every child in the room wants it to be him or her. Finally, as the scholar is leaving, they'll stop by our take-home book table, and they will take home a brand new book for their home library. A book like Hair Love. That's one of the books that we really love at Freedom Readers, or a book like I Love My Hair, or even this book by Misty Copeland called Bunheads. So what we try to do is build home libraries so that we don't have any more book deserts. We know that research tells us that the more books a child has at home, the more often they will practice reading and the better they will become at it. So I'm grateful for this opportunity to share with you a little bit about our model and how we believe that we're changing our community by sparking a love for reading in our children. If you have any questions that you'd like to share, I'd be happy to address those now.
Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Trace. There I am. Thanks, Tracy, for that. I have a couple questions. I'm going to, exert executive privilege here as more questions start to roll in. But I was struck by your the first section about how you developed your ideas of charity and the role of charity and the role of the Black church in helping articulate charity for your community. And I guess I wondered, is it something that you saw, like, is this the notion of charity that you developed, was it something that you assembled through watching the collective community at work, or is there a specific kind of mentor that you could say, a person that you watched and admired, that you sort of decided to model your own approach to giving back to your community through what you observed in how they approached their work?
Thank you for that, that wonderful question, Ware. And I think my answer to that question is yes and yes. I was surrounded by a community of people who just really, I think it was just a part of the fabric of that community to help each other out. I can remember growing up, we had this wonderful garden right across the street. Well, not the street, right across the dirt road from my house. And it was on about a half acre of land. And so my father loved that garden. That was his favorite place to be. But if he would go out there and cut a bucket of okra, then we would have bags of okra in the freezer all winter. But there would also be another bucket of okra for our neighbor next door and our cousin around the corner. I mean, it was just, if we had butter beans, they had butter beans. You would leave it on the front porch and you would leave it on the steps or in the yard. And that's just the way it was. I mean, it wasn't something that people talked about. It wasn't like they sat you down and said, okay, this is charity or this is radical care. It's just, it was just the structure of my entire growing up.
You lived in the parable of the okra, the parable of the butter beans, right?
Absolutely. That's great.
So I also found myself wanting to know more about the sort of founding of Freedom Readers. It sounds like, if I'm getting your biography right, well, if you got your degree in 2013, Freedom Readers was founded in 2010. Was it a project that you took on over the course of your PhD work, or did the PhD work emerge out of Freedom Readers? Give me a little bit of your own sort of personal sort of journey between the two or from one to the other.
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So I started my master's degree shortly after I started teaching high school in 1995.
Okay.
But it wasn't until around 2009 that I finished that master's degree. I had 2 kids in between, got married, lots of things happened. But I decided that when I finished that degree, I would immediately roll into working on a PhD. So
And found a nonprofit?
What's that?
And found a nonprofit? Or
Well,
and found a new enterprise?
That really wasn't a part of the original plan, but it kind of evolved. Because when I was in those classrooms, and I decided to take time away from teaching so that I could focus on this degree, I was learning so many wonderful things about reading and teaching kids to read and all these different theories, but there was no place in my life to apply those theories.
Right.
And at the same time, I was, watching my community get really excited politically. Like here, people that I knew all my life were getting excited to go to the polls to vote for Barack Obama around that same time. And what I understood was that that energy in our community would probably dissipate when the election was over. And if we were not able to harness that energy and use it for good, then it would all have been, well, not for naught, but it was just, I think, a catalyst for me to step forward and do some things. And so I got an invitation to go into a public housing community. I invited a lot of my friends to come with me. We took the books that we had in our homes. We came up with this model and we just hit the ground running.
So that was going to be one of my questions. So, and by the way, what a great story about not just seeing a need and sort of rising to meet a need, but seeing a unique moment where a community was ready to receive something and where you could harness energy that you could see emerging. That's that's a really powerful origin story. So you developed your model. Did you have other programs that you looked to for inspiration, or how much did you sort of take templates but reconfigure them for your community?
Yes. So as I was working on my doctorate, one of my professors had worked closely with the founder of a program called Reading Recovery. And what I found was that program was very successful in schools, and it had a lot to do with the one-to-one model. Mm-hmm. And so that was one of the things that I borrowed from the work of Marie Clay, because what I wanted to do was make sure that every child had that undivided attention of someone that was going to not only listen to them read, but listen to their stories and understand their lived experiences, make a connection between the literature that we offered and what it is that that child was bringing into the space. So yeah, I think there were a lot of influences on how this program ended up breathing and walking around in the world. I was also studying something called culturally responsive teaching. I looked a lot at the work of Geneva Gay. And I also read a lot of the work of Lisa Delpit, who wrote a book called Other People's Children, and just told the stories of teachers who were using innovative techniques to reach those children that had been deemed hardest to reach. Finally, I looked at the work of Gloria Ladson-Billings, who wrote a book about teachers who were really successful with children of color. So there definitely were a lot of models that I drew from, but I'm really glad that we have the opportunity to adjust it and make it fit the needs of the kids who are sitting right in front of us at the time.
It's incredible opportunity. I'm scribbling furiously because it's been another lifetime for me, but I was really privileged during my grad school experience to have 2 summers working at something called the Dwight Edgewood Project that was inspired by a theater project that's also about one-to-one mentorship relationships between adults and students. So I saw firsthand, it's a guy named Willie Reale developed it at the 52nd Street Project in New York, but I saw firsthand what it feels like for adults and children to collaborate on making meaning together through co-creating plays or reading plays together, or in this case, like finding the meaning together as they're reading a story and talking about it in that incredibly personal relationship that gets formed. It's really cool. So I'm emotional. I'm responding very personally to the way you're describing this work. All right, we have a couple of, and I'm doing the thing that I asked other people not to do, which is to extemporaneously, so with that, I'm going to move on. So we have a couple of questions. The first question says, how did working with high school students specifically inspire your Freedom Readers program? So working with high school students, what's the bridge from that age group to the younger group that you focused on in Freedom Readers?
Well, that's a wonderful question. I taught at the high school level for about 6 years before my first child was born. And I decided to take some time away from teaching to spend time at home with whatever the kids that we were going to have at that time. We weren't sure how many we would have. And so I think after my second child was born, I was called in by a school that was close to my house because the teacher of one of the classes was missing. And so the teacher wasn't missing. The teacher had just left the classroom, and they were having a different substitute in the classroom every day for about a month. And they had to put together a senior project, and the principal called me and said, if you could come over here and help this class, it would be great. And so I went into that room and I realized that there were students in that class. This was a senior English class that were having difficulty decoding words and writing coherent sentences. And so it just I was taken aback because I looked at that situation and I said to myself, this is educational malpractice. How do you let a child get to the last year of his formal schooling and then say to him or her, the skills you should have gotten when you were second and third grade, you just don't have them. So I said to one of those students, I will meet with you after school. We can get together. We can work on this. And she was a mom already, and she had another baby on the way. And she looked at me and she said, I've gotten this far. I think I'll be fine. And so that really shook me to my core. And the more I thought about being able to do something with my life that would make a difference, that would be meaningful, I thought, okay, let's get to them a little bit earlier. Let's see if we could go back to the 5, 6, 7-year-olds and get them excited about reading so that when they're at that age, you couldn't stop them from doing it. Let's offer the support that they need when they're younger. I mean, my vision at the beginning was to be able to work with infants all the way up to the time kids are ready to graduate from high school. And to build a structure like that, it's going to take a lot of resources. So far, we have a pretty steady block in the chain for kids kindergarten to 5th grade, and we're starting to work on middle school. But my high school experience definitely let me know that it was very important to pour all of our attention and resources into those young readers.
Wow. I'm going to follow to, what's the best piece of advice you could give a child that's hesitant when finding the spark to read? So I think I just heard part of an answer is that if you get to them too late, it's really hard to find a way to light that spark, isn't it? If you're arriving in the 11th grade. But when you're in the age group that you're working in now, how do you get that ignited when they're feeling reluctant?
I mean, it's hard when they're in high school, but it's not impossible. And so the advice that I have is not necessarily for the child, but the advice that I have is for all of the adults that surround that child. And I will go back to the second passage that I read to you this evening. What I would ask those adults to do is to first sit and listen to what that child has to say. Receive every piece of information that they want to give you. I wouldn't say guide them in this direction or that direction. First, find out where they're coming from and make a commitment yourself to meet that child where they are, because kids begin to sense what your agenda is. And if you're approaching them with something already in mind, that can turn a lot of them off. But if you are there to provide for them something that they're seeking, but they may not yet know that they're seeking it, then I think that that really does change the game.
Can I ask though, what if they're, how do you earn their trust? How do you get them to a place where if there's someone who doesn't even want to share that with you, right? Who doesn't feel, that's got to happen occasionally, right? That it takes a while to, you just have to sit there until they start talking? How do you draw it out?
Yeah, so it's really about conversation, not necessarily about books at first. As I said earlier, all of our sessions have a theme. So if the theme is, how does your garden grow? Then we talk about flowers. And I pick a few flowers and I bring them in and we count the petals and we talk about sunflower seeds. And we talk about that time when I was walking down the aisle and I carried a bouquet, and I showed them a picture of the calla lilies that I had there when I was standing at the altar. And so I share with them my experiences. I'm ready to become vulnerable, and that opens the door for them to do the same. And so it's about building trust. It's about relationship long before it's about talking about the books. But the books are just an extension of what we've already done before we pick them up.
So put this all in the context of radical care for me. So make the one more time so that because it's important. It was important to you to share that piece of your biography and that piece of, by reading that passage at the beginning about being a person who some people would say that you should have been a recipient of charity rather than a dispenser of charity, rather than a provider of radical care. So close the loop for us, if you can, to how, other than just how this beautiful program, how do you approach your day with that spirit and that ethic of radical care sort of always top of mind?
Yeah, so where I like to use the analogy of streets, right? And so radical care is about being on a two-way street instead of being on a one-way street. And so what I want the people who participate in this program to really understand is that this is a privilege for you to be able to go into this community. What you are going to gain while you're here may be even more valuable than what you share with a child while you're there. Okay?
Yeah.
So it's not about you acting out of some sense of guilt or some sense of, okay, now I have to give back, some sense of obligation. Right. It's about being vulnerable, as I said before. It's about being curious, and it's about being compassionate and understanding that as human beings, we all will need to give and we all will need to receive. And so we have to really embrace that concept in order to, I think, walk into one of these rooms with the right motivation and the right intention.
That's beautiful. And I think we have one more question that came in. Have you had any challenges with, after that rousing summary, I'm now going to bring you back into the weeds of your work. Have you had any challenges with the parents of the aspiring scholars throughout your guidance? How do you navigate issues that might arise with parents?
Right. So I'll take you back to the very beginning of the program. We started in a public housing community and just went door to door with flyers and told people what it is that we wanted to do. Not every family in that community even had children the age that we were looking to recruit at that time. And not every parent was interested in participating. But a part of the way the program is set up is that parents have to come in and sign their kids up, but it was first come, first serve. And so we found that there were many parents who were ecstatic about the fact that people were coming in to offer this kind of help. A few years ago in South Carolina, they passed a law called the South Carolina Read to Succeed Third Grade Retention Act. And so this means that a child could potentially be held back in the third grade if they didn't score at a certain level on a standardized test. And I've seen parents come through the door in tears once they've received this notification from the school that this is about to happen to their child. And they would say, you have to help me. I don't know what it is that I need to do, but you all need to help me. And so we've run into challenges in the sense that not necessarily every parent is interested in getting their child involved, but those who are interested in getting them in there will back us 1000%.
Yeah.
And I think that's a little bit counterintuitive for some people. You don't think that maybe you'll go into a certain community and find that you'll be well received with a program like ours. But I found that we really have seen some very, very grateful parents.
It sounds like an incredible gift you're giving these families, not just the children, but the families, right? And it sounds like people recognize that, and there's a lot of gratitude being expressed.
Yeah.
You shared some, what sounds like pretty incredible reach into your region. Has the program been replicated, or have you been approached about replication and beyond your area, or into areas that you wouldn't even run, other people sort of taking on the model?
Yeah, so we've been approached a few times, but I don't think it was until we were able to capture the essence of our work in this book that people were able to really access the model. So I'm really hopeful that now people will read about it and become inspired. And I just hope that it will take off, because I think we've wasted a lot of time when it comes to the education of our young people and turning them on to what books can do for them. And I mean, we've got to get going. The clock is ticking, especially now when we think about what COVID has done with our schools. We've got to get going.
It feels like we have a moment of potentially losing a generation of kids from the loss of the kind of intimate, connected instruction that your program offers is the very thing we've lost in these, what may be 2 full school cycles. So you're right. I feel the urgency of this moment, that maybe the dark side of the urgency that you felt back in 2008 when you saw an opportunity to make something special happen. Like we now have a mandate, a need to do it.
But where I also feel like this is a moment of opportunity. This is a moment where we can really think outside the box and we can reshape some things that we thought couldn't be reshaped. That's true. Who thought that we could get all of these kids in front of computers anyway? Who thought that we could be doing school from home? Right. But necessity really is the mother of invention, isn't that right?
But is that tool helping with the what I hear from, as you're describing it, there's a real deep connection that's being forged between an instructor, or I'm sorry, you called them pupils and
tutors and scholars.
Tutors and scholars, sorry.
Yes.
Between the tutor and the scholar. And do you find that the computer is a useful tool in advancing that, or it's allowed you to deepen the work, or is it more of an obstacle right now?
Well, we've actually had to pivot as well. And so we offer something called the Reading Lab, which is our virtual offering right now, because we're not meeting in person with any tutors and scholars at this point. And we found that we can assess reading skills through our Reading Lab. We can have kids fill out the interest inventory, and then we can mail out books to their homes and have them read them there. And so the weekly meetings are still taking place. Tutors and scholars are even writing letters to one another back and forth through the mail. So I wouldn't say that it's ideal. I do not think that it's not the same, but we are seeing some ways that we can deepen our understanding of where the child is coming from and meeting their need with our program.
Terrific. Well, it sounds like a resourceful response to this crazy moment. And I really appreciate your spending time with us this evening and sharing the work that you're doing and sharing the spirit in which you offer it to folks. And I hope that we can play a small part in helping you get the word out about this model and what it can mean for kids, especially right now. So Tracy Swinton Bailey, I appreciate your joining us here at Town Hall Seattle, even if virtually. And I want to urge everyone who's watched tonight, there's lots more to learn, I think, and ways that you can practically apply things that you've heard just barely described in tonight's presentation by going to the Third Place Books link and pressing purchase, and that'll just take you to a page. It'll tell you even more about the book, and you can make your decision. But I don't think you'll regret it. Forever Free, the book's called. Is that right? Forever Free.
That is correct. And where I want to thank you again for this opportunity to be here. It was a joy talking to you. Thank you for your thoughtful questions, and thank you for your interest in the work. I appreciate it.
I hope we get to see you again sometime. Thank you, everyone. See you soon.